Welcome. If you're a newly qualified social worker, this is for you. We're about to tackle one of the trickiest, most misunderstood parts of our job, resistance. This explainer is all about giving you a new and, I think, much more powerful way to think about and navigate it. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to tear down the old idea of the resistant client. Then, we'll build up a new perspective, one that sees resistance as a dynamic interaction. We'll look at what that actually means in the real world. And finally, how all this helps you move beyond just following a simple rulebook. All right, let's start with a really big question. We throw around the term client resistance all the time, but what are we actually talking about when we say that? I think the answer might just shake up some of your core assumptions. Okay, first up, let's dig into the traditional way resistance has been looked at in our field. And honestly, it's often a pretty frustrating viewpoint. This is the classic take. It basically says that resistance is a problem that lives entirely inside the client. You know the thinking. They're being difficult, they're uncooperative, maybe they're in denial. Any trouble in the relationship gets pinned on them, as if it's some kind of personal failing. But now, let's pivot. Let's look at a more critical and, frankly, a much more powerful perspective. This is a shift that can genuinely take your practice from a place of frustration to a place of real curiosity. So here's the game-changing shift. We're moving away from seeing resistance as some kind of personality trait in the client, and towards seeing it as something that happens between the client, the worker, and the system. It stops being a problem you have to overcome and becomes something you have to understand. And suddenly, the client isn't the source of the problem. They might actually be advocating for themselves in a really powerful way. Now, let's get into this term interactional accomplishment. It sounds a bit academic, but all it means is that resistance isn't just one person's reaction. It's actually co-created in the moment by everyone in the room. And that implies something huge. Both clients and, this is key, we as social workers can be contributing to it. And that's exactly why our focus has to change. Instead of trying to analyze a person's character, we need to start analyzing the interaction itself. We have to ask, what is going on in this conversation, right here, right now? So, if resistance is an interaction, then what's actually being pushed back against? Well, we can break it down by looking at the specific target of that resistance. Research shows that resistance usually fits into one of these three buckets. Someone might be resisting the immediate task at hand, or they might be pushing back against a label they find harmful, or they could be reacting to a policy that's just not working for them. And here's the thing. This applies to clients and to us practitioners. Let's make this real. Imagine a social worker in a job center meeting. Their task is to do an evaluation for a client. In this scenario, the first thing we see from the client is something called passive resistance. It's not a big, loud no, but it achieves the same thing. Now look at how this actually plays out. The client gives these super minimal responses. Yeah. It's a subtle but really effective way to grind the worker's agenda to a halt. They're not getting the info they need. That's resistance to the activity. But then it becomes much more direct, right? The client flat out refuses the home visit, and we find out why. It's too bloody embarrassing. And that reveals the deeper issue. They're resisting the stigma of being evaluated. But remember, it's not just about the clients. Social workers resist too. In that same meeting, our social worker is probably dealing with their own set of pressures, like some new reform that's buried them in paperwork. The worker's response to that paperwork, well, that can be seen as subtle resistance. It's sometimes called the micropolitics of resistance, just those small, everyday actions we take to push back against systems that get in the way. So the worker isn't going on strike. They're just subtly resisting the policy. They improvise, they find workarounds, all to get the job done right for their client. This shows that resistance isn't just something we run into, it can be a core part of our professional role. Okay, so what does this all mean for you, for your actual day-to-day work? How do we take all this insight and put it into practice? The main takeaway here isn't some new set of tricks to manage people. It's a complete shift in your mindset. It's about reevaluating what you're seeing, recognizing all its different forms, being reflexive, looking at your own role in the dynamic, and maybe even asking, could this resistance be a resource? Could this be a turning point in our work together? And that brings us to what I think is the most important point for your development as a social worker. You see, because resistance is created right there in the moment, in the unique context of every single interaction. It is absolutely impossible to create a universal rulebook, a 5 easy steps guide for how to deal with it. It just doesn't work that way. The only thing that really works is something called situated reflection. All that means is focusing on what's happening locally, getting really curious about this specific situation with this specific person in this system right now. And that right there is the crucial shift we've been building up to. It's about moving from a question of deficit, what's wrong with them, to a question of dynamics, what's happening here. Making that one simple but really profound change in how you think will completely transform your practice and your relationships with the people you're trying to help.